If you are thinking about filing for your spouse to get a green card, I know for a fact that you have some concerns and you have heard some things that make you worried about the process. Well, in this video, I am going to address those concerns and bust some of the myths that you may have heard and that is fueling your concerns. I am U.S. Immigration Attorney Lilian, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenships for themselves and their family using the U.S. immigration law system. One of the biggest concerns people have when it comes to the green card process is they are afraid that their application is going to be rejected or denied. So a rejection happens when you do not put in the right information, the right forms, or the right fees. Those are the three things that typically will cause an application to be rejected. An application is denied if the officer believes that either the petitioner does not qualify to file for the spouse or that the spouse does not qualify to get a green card. Let's start with an application being rejected. An application being rejected is one of the easiest things to fix. Like I said, there's three common things that lead to an application being rejected, and that is not including the right filing fees. Well, if you go on the USCIS website, they have their fee calculator and you can plug in your forms that you're filing and it will tell you exactly what fee you need to include. So that is one of the things that is a huge concern and now you have a solution for. The second one is not filling out the correct forms. Well, depending on what you're filing for, who you're filing for, the forms are on the USCIS website. The instructions tell you exactly what forms need to go with that. And also tells you the documentation that you need to include as well. But documentation on its own will not cause an application to be rejected, but the wrong forms will cause an application to be rejected. Filling out the forms incorrectly can lead to the application being rejected. For example, on the form I-485, there is a section that asks how the person qualifies for a green card. And if you check off the wrong box, that can cause your application to be rejected. So for example, if your spouse is qualified for a green card because you have an I-130 pending or an I-130 approved, that should be the box you check. If you check any other box, for example, if you check the K-1 visa box, you better have an I-129F that was approved for your spouse. Because guess what? USCIS can only go by what you tell them. And if you check off the wrong box, they will have to reject because they don't know where you fit, right? If you're telling them that it is based on the K-1 visa, but there's no evidence in your file that goes along with that, they will reject your application. For applications that are denied, you want to make sure before you even file that the person you're filing for, your spouse, qualifies for the petition that you're filing and that they meet the requirements. A person may have qualified, but they may have had some misrepresentation. So you want to know that ahead of time, because if you do not know that, you get to your interview or the officer asks for a waiver and they don't qualify for a waiver, you are now stuck with a denial. So you want to know ahead of time what things can come up and how to get prepared for them ahead of time. Another concern that people have is the legitimacy of their marriage. How to prove that to USCIS, especially if they have only been married for a short amount of time. Well, a way to alleviate this is to document your relationship. Remember, your dating relationship counts as your relationship. USCIS will want documentation from the time you're married onwards, but let's say you just got married and you don't really have a lot together. Your dating relationship can be used to show that your relationship is real. So make sure that this is not something stopping you from starting the process. So if you just got married, you don't have the joint bank account yet, you don't have a lease together yet, even though you're living together, right? Even though you're just moved in together, you haven't updated your lease yet, that is okay, because guess what? Once you file your application, you include the documentation that you do have. USCIS, when they're ready to make a decision, they will either schedule you for an interview or ask you for additional documents. Guess what you do then? You send in those additional documents that you didn't have at the time you started the process. Okay? If you have an interview, you take those documents with you to the interview. People also have a huge anxiety around the interview process. Well, let me help you out here. The interview is literally the officer trying to understand you, your spouse, and your relationship. Interview questions are going to center around you and your spouse, how you met, when you met, dates, locations, things of that nature. As long as you know your spouse, as long as you know your relationship, that part is going to be a whole lot easier. So remember, when it comes to the interview, it can be very, very nerve-wracking, but just know you are the best person to answer questions about your relationship. You know when you met, you know where you went on your first date, you know when you got married, who was there, who wasn't there, why they weren't there. You know all of these things. You know where your spouse works, you know when they wake up in the morning, when they get home after work, right? You know all these things. So just realize that that's what the officer is going to be asking you about. So if that is stressful to you, just sit back, think about all of those things that I just mentioned, and then go ahead and watch my video on interview questions to expect at a marriage-based interview. That will help you better prepare for the interview. And that's why these videos exist on my channel, is to help alleviate the anxiety and the complexity of this whole process. One thing I do for my clients, I'm not sure if every single immigration lawyer does this, but one thing I definitely do for my clients is do a pre-interview meeting where we talk about what to expect at the interview, ask any questions. If my clients are overly nervous or have a lot of anxiety, we do a full-blown mock interview. Okay, where I pretend to be the officer, asking them the tough questions, asking them all the things that an officer may ask based on their applications. And let me tell you, this helps my clients a lot. Like, they come in and they go through the questions and they're like, oh, that's it? That's the questions? And that really helps calm people down because it is nerve-wracking not knowing what to expect. One concern that people have is the financial burden, the financial obligation that they have to their spouse when they are filing a green card application for them. Every single green card application needs an affidavit of support. That is non-negotiable. Every green card application needs an affidavit of support. So when you're filing for your spouse, you need to include an affidavit of support. You need to show that your income is enough that your spouse will not need government assistance. And if they end up needing government assistance, by signing the affidavit of support, you're saying that you are okay with the government coming and asking for reimbursement from you. This is something that scares people, but let's put it this way. If your spouse is able-bodied and is able to work, the chances of them actually needing your financial support is going to be much, much lower. And once they become a U.S. citizen, remember, with spouses of U.S. citizens, they can become a U.S. citizen in 3 years. So that financial obligation goes away once they become U.S. citizens. So although, yes, there is a financial burden, but once they become a U.S. citizen, that affidavit of support goes away. You no longer have the obligation under the affidavit of support. The last concern that I hear from a lot of people is just how complex the immigration process can be. And unfortunately, I cannot sit here and tell you that it is not complex, right? Depending on your particular situation, the fix, the steps may be different, right? So I cannot tell you that it is not a complex process. It is immigration law. It is different laws, case law coming together and forming what we know today as immigration law. However, there is a solution that I can offer you when it comes to dealing with the complexity of the immigration process, and that is working with an immigration lawyer. This way, we get to study the laws, the intricacies, figure out how it will affect you in your particular situation. Like I said, the fix for everyone is not the same, and each person's situation is completely different. And I tell people this all the time. I'll give you an example on how two couples that seem like they have the same exact case can end up with two different results. On one hand, this couple over here are married, they live together, they're building their life together. But the spouse that is getting the green card already filed before with another spouse, and they were, at the interview, they withdrew the application. And that was it. This spouse over here, same situation, filed with a prior spouse, got to the interview, they withdrew the application, and that was it. Now, let's talk about the intricacies, right? How did the application end up being withdrawn? Why was the application withdrawn? Those are the things that make one case different from the other. So one case may have been withdrawn because the couple just did not want to move forward. Their relationship was already on the rocks. They didn't want to move forward with it. They're like, okay, let's just get a divorce. Let's end this. We don't need to move forward. And then on the other hand, you may have a case where, yes, it was withdrawn, but the reason it was withdrawn was that there was suspicion of marriage fraud and there was admission of marriage fraud. And then the application was withdrawn. Do you see how the fix for one is not going to be the same as the fix for the other? Because this one over here does not have any allegations of marriage fraud, while this one over here does. So even though on the paper, filed with prior spouse, withdrew the application, now filing with current spouse. Filed with prior spouse, withdrew the application, now filing with current spouse. You need to know what exactly happened in each situation to know what to do. Okay, that's why I ask people a lot of questions about how they came into the US, how they, everything. Everything I could possibly ask that will lead to a situation being different, I will ask you so that I make sure that you are getting the proper fix for your situation. So yes, immigration law is complex, but your lawyer's job is to make it less complex, right? To take the complexity out of it, where you get to give us documents, you get to give us information, and we deal with the complexities for you. The easiest way for you to alleviate all these concerns, all this anxiety, is to work with an immigration lawyer that knows what they're doing, that knows the forms, the fees, everything there is to know about your particular process, so that you can rest assured that your process is going according to plan. You do not have to sit there and think about what forms to fill out, what documents I need to include, what fees I need to include. Does my spouse qualify? What do I need to do for the interview? What do I bring to the interview? You don't want to think about any of that. So the best thing for you to do is to work with an immigration lawyer so that you can just sit back and wait for your process to go through. Now, if you are looking to work with an immigration lawyer to find out what your steps are going to look like, what the process is going to look like for your particular situation, remember I said every single case is unique, and I treat it that way because your particular marriage is different from other people's, and we want to give you the attention that your particular situation deserves. So if you are looking for an immigration lawyer, go ahead and schedule a strategy session with me. You can do that by going to my website, Lillylegal.com, or by calling my office at 508-443-1788.